Welcome everyone to today's webinar called Following the Evolution of Office 365 Groups to Microsoft 365 Groups. Before we get started, let me just go over a few housekeeping topics. First of all, today's webinar is being recorded, and we will share a link with you after the event is complete. We welcome you to revisit the content yourself or share it with your colleagues. We also invite your comments and questions, and at the bottom of your screen, you will have a Q&A panel. We have an amazing special guest that we're going to introduce shortly from Microsoft, and please ask all of the questions you have because you don't always get the chance to ask your questions directly to an amazing speaker from Microsoft. So let's get started. My name is Vlad Catrinescu, Microsoft MVP from Montreal, Canada. And today I'm joined by my co-host and good friend, Drew Madelung. How are you doing, Drew?
Very good, Vlad. Excited for the summer to start kicking in here and keep talking about some more fun topics with you.
Awesome. And we also have a special guest, Mike McLean, directly from Microsoft. How are you doing, Mike?
Doing great. Thanks so much for inviting me to be here today. I'm really looking forward to talking about groups with both of you.
It's our pleasure. And thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to talk to the community. Just for those that do not know you, can you do a quick introduction?
Yes, definitely. So like you said, my name is Mike McLean. I am a program manager on the Microsoft 365 Groups engineering team. We'll talk a little bit about our rebranding as we get started. I've been at Microsoft for 15 years now. I just hit 15 years in March. It's been a super exciting journey. Before working on the Groups platform, I actually helped ship Microsoft Planner, which a lot of folks are familiar with now. And I spent some time shipping services like Project Online, the initial release of SharePoint Online, and then I spent several years working in Microsoft Dynamics as well. So it's been a great ride here at Microsoft. And we've been super busy this year trying to improve the Groups platform, and really looking forward to talking through a lot of the great things we have on the roadmap, along with kind of the journey that we've been on with Office 365 Groups over the past few years have now led us to really broadening our branding and our positioning to Microsoft 365 Groups.
Awesome. So wait, are you 5 or 10 years away for having your name in Building 33? I forgot.
I'm still 10 years away.
10 years away.
That is the 25 years.
25 years, huh?
Yeah, it's 25 years total, so 10 years away. But time flies, so we'll see what happens.
It's really interesting how you went and worked with a bunch of different products that now with Microsoft 365 Groups, you still end up working in a way with the same products. And I think that's what makes this, the concept of group special is that you need to know every single part of like what each application does in order to understand how they help people collaborate better.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think, that's one great thing about being at Microsoft is as you move to these different teams, in some ways it feels like you're starting at a new company when you go learn a new product and you start working on a new service. However, it has a very familiar feel because you're working with a lot of the same folks, and so coming to groups, you're right. There were a lot of great lessons learned and technologies that we had already worked with when we shipped Microsoft Planner. But when you go into groups, you're right, you really need to understand the platform and then how it drives a lot of the experiences that surface and a lot of the peripheral applications. I think back years ago, it was a little bit of a different world where you could go very deep in one particular area. You could focus primarily on SharePoint, primarily on Exchange for mail. But now that we've really tried to tie things together with the Groups membership service, it's important to know how they all relate. And so in some sense, we're really administering the entire service and not just one particular component now.
And that's what I've seen in consulting with a lot of different companies, especially as you get into larger enterprises. educating people on how the administration can occur and really informing people on how things are all interconnected with the group service. I have so many projects that end up diving into groups governance and groups administration because people come from, I mean, Vlad and myself, we've done sessions before on site provisioning in SharePoint or provisioning plans. And when you kind of bring that together, you can't just look at it as a single entity, you're looking at it as a platform. And the back end of this and the service side of this is essential for people to understand, for organizations to understand. And it's definitely interesting to watch this evolved in the last 4 years, kind of when kind of groups launched. So definitely been pretty cool on my end to see kind of how it's changed, and for sure how it how the administration of it and governance of it has continued to evolve with some of the functionality available.
But hey, let's start diving deeper into the stuff that you want to talk about. Mike, you can share your screen if you want and get started showing us the cool new stuff.
Sounds great. Let me pull that up right now. Let me share my screen. Let's see here.
There we go. I can see the cover slide.
Okay, perfect. Great. Well, thanks again for inviting me here today. I included my contact information as usual. If anyone would like to reach out with any additional questions, I have my email address here as well as my Twitter handle. I think that this is actually a great opportunity to connect with folks in the community. Normally, when we're working our way through our fiscal year, we obviously have Microsoft Ignite in Orlando in fall, and then we follow that with a series of presentations around the world and at Microsoft Ignite the Tour. I think that was last time I saw you, Vlad, was when I was presenting in Toronto. I popped into one of your sessions. And so here, we made it through several cities, obviously before, the global pandemic took hold, but now we have an opportunity to kind of circle back and, use avenues like this to touch base with folks and just kind of update everyone on some of the messaging and the progress that we've made around the platform. So for anyone who's not entirely familiar, Office 365 Groups has been this platform that's really tied together a lot of these related services around document collaboration, calendaring, email, and now chat with Microsoft Teams. When we look at the way the products were built originally, if a user needed to, let's say, create a document in which they needed to collaborate, they might go create a SharePoint site or request one from their IT department. And then if they needed to send an email to a group of people, they would then go create a distribution list and add the same folks to a distribution list and send out a bulk email. And so Groups was invented as a way to pull together that membership into a service so that it transitions across all these related workloads. Now you don't need to add the same set of individuals to a SharePoint site that you just added to your distribution list to receive email. And so with this new membership service concept, we're able to kind of pull everything together and then extend the use of it by adding new features like Microsoft Stream for publishing videos, Microsoft Planner for publishing tasks, Microsoft Forms for sharing and publishing form results. And so it's really allowed a lot of our customers to communicate in a more secure manner because they can look at the list and know exactly who is a member of this group. They can identify whether there are external users who have been added to this group, and then it's very easy for them to add or remove someone. And then when you look at the efficiencies that it's driven, a lot of our customers now are able to enable their end users to create these groups and really remove IT as a bottleneck in a lot of scenarios. This allows information technology to focus more on things like long-term strategy or vision planning around the services that they know need to be adopted across their org, understand usage patterns and things like that. So by enabling self-service, if I need to go communicate with a set of folks, either let's say in chat inside Microsoft Teams or in Yammer with a new community, I can get started very quickly, and it saves everyone a lot of time. So when we look at the platform and how it's evolved, we were really excited and motivated heading into 2020 when we looked at the usage across the platform and realized that it had increased about 107% over the same time the prior year. And so when we look at usage in the group's platform, we're looking at the usage across all the related apps. So usage in SharePoint, usage in Yammer, usage in Outlook and Teams, et cetera. And when you look at that usage, it had more than doubled from fall 2018. And so heading into 2020, we thought we were doing great. Then the global pandemic hit. Everyone started working remote, and we've really just seen an acceleration in the adoption of these technologies. What companies would normally look at deploying over, let's say like a 6 to 12 month period, or maybe even forecasting out a couple of years, we're now trying to be accomplished within like 2 weeks. So we had schools, rolling out Microsoft Teams, enterprises rolling out Teams, Mail, and Yammer as well. And so, there's been a lot of information published around how Teams has seen growth from, for example, roughly 20 million daily active users at the end of 2019, jumping to like 32 million and 44 million, 2 weeks later in the month of March. So I'm pretty interested to see how the numbers look when we pull them at the end of this quarter and kind of refresh this for the next year. When we look at how like groups are being used, we do see a lot of customers start with their traditional email scenarios and move these into Microsoft 365 groups to leverage like the mail capabilities that we offer. And so some of the numbers we see show about 1,000 distribution lists upgraded to groups each week. So that's pretty awesome to know that customers are working through that process. And they're not just collaborating inside their org, they're pulling in people from outside of their organization, they're adding them as guests. And we've seen about 9 million guest provision through groups, and this number has obviously gone up probably since the time I pulled these numbers. But across the platform, we've also invested quite a bit in like the performance, the reliability, and just trying to improve the time it takes to complete various operations. So if you've been around for a while, you might remember when groups first shipped. Sometimes you would create a group in Outlook, and then it might take some time before the SharePoint site was available. We now have Instant On, where we'll call over and try to make that available instantaneously. And we've also reduced the amount of time it takes to actually provision that group artifact. So when we look at the momentum of the platform, like I said, all the different peripheral workloads that have now attached themselves to the group's membership service, we now support over 22 first-party apps that connect to the group's platform. A lot of folks, they don't realize that it surfaces in so many different places. When you are creating like a team, a community, a plan, or a team site, they now create a group under the covers as a primary entity. And then on the left side here, we have a set of applications that interact with groups in a different way. They consume more of the content. And for example, when you're working in Word, Excel, PowerPoint, you can save to the site that's attached to your group. When you're creating a form, you can now save this to a group. And if I'm on vacation and let's say Drew needs to process the form results, he'll have access to those and he doesn't have to wait for me to come back. Power BI, the new project, they're all leveraging the group's platform. And on the right side, we have our partner ecosystem. Obviously, this is just a small snapshot of the partners that have built on the platform, but we expose all these entities through Microsoft Graph and the Power Platform so that folks can build new workflows and applications on top of the service. And so when we look at the impact of the platform and how it's grown over time, we started as Office 365 groups, but we realized it's having a much more broader impact across Microsoft 365 in general. And so that's why we recently announced that the platform is actually being rebranded now as Microsoft 365 groups. So I think that's one of the first big things we'll touch on today. When we think about this rebranding, we've actually been considering it for quite some time. And we even, we're getting questions at some of our most recent conferences around, hey, does it make sense since we integrate more deeply, across the suite for us to really, extend our branding? And the answer is, well, yeah, it does. And with the messages that were delivered over the past quarter around the rebranding, around like business essentials and some other suites, it really was the perfect opportunity to announce the fact, we're really rebranding Office 365 groups as something that can now reflect the growth of the platform. So we did have a public blog post that went out. Scott Schnell posted this quarter, and we've announced this on the public Microsoft release roadmap. And so I think what you can expect to see over the next 2 quarters are more of the related workloads reflecting the Microsoft 365 groups brand. And so we're working with the partners such as SharePoint, Teams, YammerStream, everyone else, to reflect this across their applications and deeper into Azure Active Directory. So just keep in mind, you'll probably see this roll out, and it's mainly just to reflect the fact that there's a much broader impact now of the service.
I guess the rebranding at Microsoft, it's not something that's easy. So it's really something that you guys probably made a big decision to go to, as you said, it's the documentation, the marketing, and all of the other products. And I think I see the icons, there are over 10 products where you have the Office 365 group names.
Right. Yeah, no, you're right. And I will mention that it's the way we're rolling out the rebranding is we're not going to be changing the underlying APIs and how we reference the group entity. So there won't be any breaking changes for partners or customers. It's mainly, to reflect how we refer to the service as a whole. But you're right, it's not something that's taken lightly. And there were a lot of discussions on how to correctly reference the membership service. And so this is the direction that we're heading.
Will you see it in places like when you're in like an Azure AD or some of the places that we're referencing the word Office? We kind of start to see those slowly trickle through into the new brand?
Yeah, that's a good point. We will see it reflected there as well. Over the last couple of years, we've done work to align the terms and experiences in the AD portal more closely with like the M365 admin portal and the other parts of the suite, where, for example, instead of like clicking a box to enable Office features, you now actually select the Office 365 group type. And so what we'll be doing is going through and updating those as well. Exactly. Great. So when we look at the service and how our customers are viewing the service and how they begin to roll out and adopt the service, there's a couple of different phases in which they work through. And this will kind of set us up to discuss some of the items that we have in our roadmap and some of the progress that we've made. When customers learn about these group concepts, they generally go through this initial phase where they start exploring like what groups are. So folks listening right now on this webinar could be in this phase where they're trying to understand this thing called groups. They know collaboration is key, and they need to figure out how they can do this in a remote way in a new world of work. And so once they kind of understand, all right, groups as a membership service, there's an item in Azure Active Directory, which is the group object. It then syncs down and provisions related services. Then they usually will scope some type of initial pilot where they'll roll out some controlled participation. And so here's where they will start identifying certain aspects of like the governance process that Drew alluded to earlier. Perhaps start looking at some of the APIs that we made available if they need to introduce some custom flows. And they have some controlled participation where they potentially scope who can create groups. And so there is a way in your org to say only a particular set of users can create groups. You can specify that through the group settings and in PowerShell. And so what a lot of customers will do is they'll start a pilot and allow a certain set of folks to create groups, and they can start using SharePoint, Mail, Teams, or Yammer. Then usually what they'll do is they'll expand that rollout, and then here's where they can identify, potentially how they want to classify data, perhaps how long they need to, retain data. Since the pilot's been running for a while, they start to learn more about the life cycle of the groups and how long customers will keep their data around. And then they'll reach this point where they've rolled out groups to much broader, if not the entire organization. At that point, they will hopefully have enabled self-service provisioning for a larger set of groups to really put the hands in the end user. And at this point, they have identified potentially how long they're going to keep groups inside their org if they have not been used, and they'll understand that these will be expired or renewed based on behavior. But I think the key takeaway here is that it's really like a living, breathing thing at that point. It's not a service you just deploy and walk away. There are some obvious maintenance aspects where you want to understand, okay, here's a set of let's say active groups that we're seeing in our org. Here's potentially some groups where owners have left, and then there's a lot of monitoring and reporting that's available to help with that. And so when we look at the different aspects, there's the end user aspect of groups where you're actually interacting with the SharePoint team site or a team in Microsoft Teams or a group in Outlook, for example. And then there's the administrative aspect where you're actually managing these groups at scale. Over the past 12 months, we've been extremely busy, and I've highlighted a few of the innovations that we've delivered here. And then I have some more target enhancements later in the deck that we've been working on over the last couple of quarters. But just to touch on a few of these, for example, when a group is private and you can only see the content if you're a member, we support the ability for a user to request to join, and then now they're held as a pending member. And within the Groups Hub and Outlook, a group owner can triage all these requests and approve them in bulk. So if Vlad wanted to join my group and it's private, I would actually see in my Groups Hub inside Outlook that he's requested. I can approve, I can decline, I can send him a message, and we've enabled a lot more communication there between the person who's requesting and the group owner. When you're working with a group in SharePoint, Outlook, or one of these experiences, you have the ability to see the full list of members, and we now support searching on those members in the group card, and we support the ability to manage that list through your team's mobile client and a lot of different places. We do support what's called actionable emails now in Outlook, where a group owner will receive an email that someone has requested to join, and they can approve or decline right there in Outlook in line. So that's really accelerated the process to onboard new users into your group. From a teamwork perspective, we've focused a lot on some of the top priority requests we've received in Outlook around being able to drag and drop emails to the group mailbox. So as customers are looking to use groups as a repository for mail sent to a group, they can now drag a mail from their personal inbox to that group mailbox and almost use it as like an archive or repository.
Yeah, that's been a nice one. That was definitely one that was in working with customers. A lot of people were asking about, so that was a nice one to see.
No, that's great to hear. And the Outlook desktop team has been super busy because there's a lot of usage, obviously that we're seeing in the Outlook desktop client. And Outlook desktop is where I would say a good percentage of folks triage and work with their mail. So as we roll features out to Outlook, very frequently we can enable them in Outlook web first, and then obviously take them to Outlook desktop afterwards. And then when we look at the services attached to the group, calendar is a big one, right? Because this is a service that can be used to schedule meetings for the group, put them in a shared space where everyone can see them. And the group calendar has now been enhanced to actually support select invitees. So if I put a meeting on the group calendar and I invite let's say Drew to present like a brown bag, but he's not part of the group, he can receive that email, and we don't have to force this invite into every person's inbox. We can put that on the calendar, we can invite Drew, and then he's there. So there's a lot more flexibility just in terms of how folks can interact with the calendar, including actually seeing that group calendar on iOS now. And then lastly, from an engagement perspective, there's been a lot of improvements in terms of how a user can subscribe to mail and how it gets delivered to their mailbox. So a user can opt in to receive every single mail sent to the group mailbox if they like, and it'll function just like a distribution list did previously. And from a broader perspective, there's been a lot deeper integration with scenarios like live events through Yammer, and we've been working pretty aggressively to deliver what we call native mode, where the customer can place Yammer in a state where every community is backed by a Microsoft 365 group and takes advantage of all the great infrastructure that groups offers. All right, so from an admin perspective, we have a few different places where groups are managed. There is the Azure Active Directory portal, which is great if you're a tenant admin and you have access to all the objects in your organization, or you need to put in policies that apply at an organizational level. This is where you would define like naming policies or group expiry life cycles. And then we've got the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, which is an experience for admins who are primarily managing like a particular workload or groups, and you need to take a specific action related to, let's say, email or provisioning Microsoft 365 groups or modifying membership. And these are folks who don't necessarily need access to all the tenant-wide settings in Azure Active Directory. And so within the M365 Admin Center, you'll see scenarios where perhaps they need to update ownership, membership, enable teams, or things of that nature, which would not be available in the AD portal. Then we have more specialist admin centers where you may need to take action on something specific to, let's say, Microsoft Teams or a SharePoint site. And so obviously SharePoint admin centers where you could come see all the sites that are associated with groups or information specific to SharePoint. So when we look at these capabilities, we have introduced a new groups administrator role, which is now has a scope set of permissions for a user who primarily needs to manage ownership, membership, or settings specific to groups. So now these can be managed without making that person tenant admin. So this has been a huge win for a lot of our customers. Working with SharePoint, like I mentioned, we now can update the SharePoint site URL that's attached to the group. So this is pretty huge because previously you were not able to change this, and working with SharePoint, there's now an experience in the SharePoint Admin Center where that can be done. I'll show a little bit of the improvements we made to the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, so I won't go too far into that right now. But when you look at how data is like classified and users are managed at scale, over here on the right, we call out the fact that we have an integration to the entitlement management suite that was shipped in AED. And so this feature, it's probably big enough area it could have its own webinar, but it helps ensure that when you add an external user, you can build policies where the group owners need to reattest that they actually still should be part of the organization after a period of time. Because really what you want to avoid is adding a user and then have them becoming a member and having access to this content for an indefinite period of time. So this lets you say, I want my group owner every 6 months to verify that these 5 people from this third-party consulting firm should still have access to all this data. And if not, then you could take some decisions to either automatically renew them, or remove them, or send a follow-up message, or a variety of different actions. Great. So when we look at the roadmap and kind of where we're headed, there's several areas in which we're investing, and so we've spent a lot of time enhancing the classification scenario where instead of just providing like a label on a group that indicates this is a highly confidential group, we can actually drive behaviors in that group. And so this first item here on a roadmap is around a deeper integration to the Microsoft Information Protection Suite. And so we've been doing a lot of work there to provide the ability to assign a label to a group that will then determine whether or not that group is allowed to have external users, or if it must be private, for example. And so we'll talk a bit about the timelines there shortly. I discussed the group's admin role. We're looking at some additional capabilities that we can add to extend that a little bit. So today what I'll do is I'll walk through some of the enhancements we've already delivered on the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of these experiences between Outlook Teams and a few other areas in which we made some progress. So when we look at the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, this is where a lot of the core group management scenarios are surfaced. And so when we entered kind of this new world of work over the last couple of quarters, we've heard a lot of feedback around the fact that customers need more ways to manage groups at scale through this experience and across the platform in general. And so the teams have been working pretty aggressively to evaluate our priorities and try to enhance these experiences. And so when you look at the Admin Center, it's now entirely powered by Microsoft Graph behind the scenes. So when you look at the data that's retrieved and displayed in Microsoft 365 Admin Center, is using the same Microsoft Graph APIs that we've exposed publicly for everyone else to integrate with groups. So the group's engineering team has been working to make new properties and capabilities available through our APIs that can then be consumed by experiences like the Admin Center. And so we'll see that the Admin Center has focused on delivering new scenarios like exporting the entire group list, which is now the #1 request from admins. This is raised at the list. We also support restoring deleted groups from this experience right here, and a few others like Teamify and messaging. So I think what I'll do is I'm going to just jump into the product real quick and show some of these in action. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, so folks should be able to see the Microsoft 365 Admin Center.
Yes, I can
Yep,
confirm for you.
Okay, great. So like I mentioned, the Admin Center is doing a lot of great work to really power like all these queries by Microsoft Graph now. And so the first thing I'll highlight is just the fact they've really been able to improve like the search, filtering, and sort. When I now search for a term like market, previously we could really only find this term if the group name started with this phrase. And so now we can find all of the groups where marketing was possibly mentioned either at the beginning of the group name or in the middle of the group name, or in some cases it's even kind of buried down here as part of the group name, where you have United States marketing. And so here there's a little more flexibility in terms of being able to find a term across all of your groups. And another thing that we've done with the Admin Center is highlight where that term might show up in the group email. So you can see here in the places where marketing is mentioned, it's bolded to provide more of a visual indicator to the user that, oh, hey, this might be a group in which you're interested. So it's really nice that Admin Center has been able to expand the search capabilities a bit, leveraging the new search technologies provided by Microsoft Graph. When I'm looking at this result, I can now also sort by my group name, which is pretty nice. So previously it was really one or the other, search or sort. And I think folks might have seen this, but underneath our filter, we now support a few additional options out of the box in terms of filtering on groups that are associated with teams or groups that are just distribution lists or potentially mail-enabled security groups or just Office 365 groups by themselves. When you look at this experience, the other thing we added was the ability to export the full group list. So if I click export as a user, I can now bring out the entire group list to a CSV, and I can triage and look at my entire list of groups. So we'll let this come up for a sec. When you look at this list, you'll see I've got my group ID, I have my group names, I have the group alias here, and we even include information around like the group type, whether it's synced to from on-prem, powered by dynamic membership rules, or even whether or not it has Microsoft Teams enabled on it. So this is a pretty nice way for an admin to get a quick view of all the groups in their org if they need to process this or include this in some other type of reporting. So in the admin experience here, we've also added the ability to restore deleted groups. So when I look at my groups here, I have the ability to restore these and bring these back to life. And so if the group is in a soft deleted state within that initial 30-day period, I can restore my group object. I can restore all of the related workloads that are attached to that group, including like the SharePoint site, the planner tasks, and the mail and everything else. And the last scenario I'll walk through briefly is probably one of the most highly requested features we received on the group side, which was the ability to update the email address that's associated with an Office 365 group. So if I select, let's say, my Alpha FY20 planning group, up here in my toolbar, I have a new button called Edit Email Addresses. And so folks might be aware that when you create an Office 365 group, or now a Microsoft 365 group, you get an email address with that group. We have provided PowerShell commandlets in the past to change that email address or add a secondary email address, but it required an admin to go run some PowerShell, and they had to execute the right scripts. Now we actually have a nice user experience where somebody can come in and they can say, okay, I'm going to use this for, let's say, FY21 now, and I want this to be an additional email address on my group. They can add that, and for some period of time, they could receive email now at both email addresses. So let's say they're in a transition state where they're moving from one year to the next. If someone replies to an old email that was sent to the previous address, they'll still receive it at the new one. And so they can add this to their group. We can save our changes. And then in the future, if we need to, we could come back. We can edit that primary, or you can even delete an email address. So you have quite a few options here. If you like to add one, if you need to delete the original, to release that to, let's say, somebody else who wants to use that inside the organization. So we're pretty excited to be able to offer that, from an end user perspective, or I should say, from a user experience perspective for the admin. All right, so let me jump back to the deck here. Pull this back up. Okay. Click share. All right, so folks should be able to see the improved search in Microsoft Admin Center slide.
Yes, with the green
Great.
Background. Yes.
Perfect. So this is what I just walked through. So we improved search in Admin Center. We've provided the ability to export that full groups list. And one feature I didn't show because I'd already created my group was the fact that when you are building a group in the Admin Center, adding users, you now have the ability to enable Microsoft Teams at the initial group creation. And as part of that process, when you add group owners, we'll be flagging whether or not that group owner has a license for Teams. This is really nice because it prevents you from adding a user who might not have a license and can't access Teams, and that causes another round trip back to the admin to either add a license or add a different owner. Great, and then we walk through the ability to edit that email address on your Microsoft 365 group, where you can add a secondary, you can make the secondary primary, or you can delete the previous email address to release that back into the org. Now, from a group's platform perspective, there's a lot of enhancements that we've been busy trying to deliver to improve how customers and partners interact with our APIs. A lot of these are new since Microsoft Ignite. We did mention previously on a roadmap, we were working on the ability to remove the requirement that to change any properties that are mastered in Exchange online, you had to be assigned an Exchange license. And so we've finished work on this scenario and actually shipped this to the V1 endpoint of Microsoft Graph. So you might be asking, all right, what does this mean? Well, now if an admin or related app needs to come in and make a change to one of these properties, let's say allow external senders to email this group, they no longer need to be assigned a license to actually update that property. When you look at groups, there are a lot of related services, right? And some properties that are specific to mail are mastered in Exchange Online. Some that are specific to Teams are mastered in Microsoft Teams chat service. SharePoint has their properties as well. And so when for example, a feature like allow external senders to email this group is delivered, or the ability to hide a group from my global address list, that property is mastered in Exchange. And so it can be very difficult for customers to keep track of which licenses they need to modify different properties. So from an Exchange perspective, we removed that requirement. And so this list over here shows a full list of properties that can now be modified without a license. And so this prevents an org from having to burn a license by assigning it to an admin just to come in and update these properties. So we published this on a blog post on the tech community, and you can go, feel free to take a look at that anytime. Now, the second thing that we shipped were two new properties in Microsoft Graph for the group resource. The first is hide from Outlook clients, and the second one is hide from address lists. So these are a follow-on to the properties that were enabled in PowerShell, and these actually help control whether a group should be available in the Outlook left-hand navigation, whether it should resolve during message creation or show in the global address book. And so when let's say a user creates a new team inside Microsoft Teams, if they decide at a later point they want to show that in Outlook and use mail capabilities as well, that's perfectly fine. Traditionally, they'd have to, call their admin, have them run a PowerShell commandlet. Now we've exposed these properties to hide and show in Microsoft Graph. So if any of our partners or customers are building workflows or experiences where they want to enable that on the fly, they can plug into Microsoft Graph and they can hide and show these groups. So this has fully shipped to the V1 endpoint, and we also publish this on both the tech community and the Microsoft developer blog. So this was out there, and you feel free to reference that as well.
I know one of them was really popular on user voice because I remember voting for the hide from address list. And I remember getting the email when you guys finally pushed it, and I was really happy about that one.
Yeah, you're right, and that just goes to show we do listen to user voice, and we did take that as input. We have a backlog that we built based on all of the requests around the ecosystem, and so it was nice we were able to enable it for both of these, and they're now available. So this is really the first step in terms of trying to build additional experiences where we hide and show these groups in different parts of the suite. Great. So moving along, this was a pretty big one. So we had, again, a lot of feedback on user voice and from a lot of our customers at conferences and various meetings that they wanted to understand more info around where a group was created, essentially where the group is born. And so previously, we didn't really have a way to expose this, but between Azure Active Directory and the Microsoft 365 Group Platform team, we added a new property to the group object called created by app ID. And so this supports all first-party apps and any registered third-party apps. And the way it works, as shown in these screenshots here, is that if a user comes in, they create a new team, let's say in Microsoft Teams, the created by app ID property would be populated with an app ID that's specific to the team's services. And so we've got different app IDs for Teams, for Outlook, for SharePoint, for Planner, for everyone else that creates groups. So this will be stamped once. And then from that point, there's a couple ways the customer can reference that app ID. We already expose a service principals query where a user can reference a particular ID, and it'll tell them that this is related to a Microsoft Teams service. We're also going to be publishing a table that is a pretty quick mapping of IDs to names, but the real source of truth comes down to the service principals query here. And so this has shipped to the beta endpoint right now, so it's available in your tenants, and obviously we'll be looking at taking this to the GA endpoint in the near future.
A question here, Mike, from myself as an IT pro. Do you know if this will be coming to PowerShell as well, or it will be only Graph? I know there's the PowerShell Graph module, of course, but talking about the kind of Exchange Online or Azure AD modules, will the created by app ID also be there?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and we have gotten that a couple times, and so I think what I've noticed is there's a lot of interest in bringing this to PowerShell. And so I am talking with the Azure AD folks about how to enable this in the Azure AD PowerShell. So it's something we hope to enable soon. It might not be there when this hits GA, but hopefully shortly thereafter.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, and since it's a property that's more at the group object level, it would likely show up in the Azure AD PowerShell and not the Exchange PowerShell.
Yeah, it's still a bit, and I mean, I know we only have 11 minutes, so we can talk PowerShell at the end. But yeah, as an admin, you're always between 2 or 3 PowerShell modules when you want to fully manage groups, and that makes it really interesting. Like you said, you need to know multiple things, and I guess with the Graph module, and I guess you guys are working a bit with the team working on the PowerShell Graph module to bring everything. And you guys only have to ship one thing. That'll be super cool as well, and something to look forward to.
Yeah, definitely. Great. Okay, so I'll move through some of the enhancements we've been looking at on the client side, and this one we did announce has hit general availability this past quarter. We were looking at ways to bridge that gap between Outlook and Teams. So very frequently there are chats occurring inside Teams that are backed by Microsoft 365 groups, and occasionally you need to pull in someone else into that chat. And so if they're not actively monitoring Teams, or if they miss an app mention or something like that, they might not know that there's something needed from them. So now within Microsoft Teams, a user can click the ellipses for either a message or a parent thread, and they can click share to Outlook. And so what this will do is allow them to generate a new mail message where they can pull in Alex and say, hey Alex, can you address this? Or maybe we need your feedback. And then that mail message will have a direct link back to that Teams chat. So this is a way to engage other folks into the conversation and actually pull them in. So there's a couple of links here I included. One was a reference to what's new in Microsoft Teams, and then a specific walkthrough around sharing to Outlook from Teams. All right, so now we'll talk about last couple items here that we're looking to ship soon this quarter. So sensitivity labels, I briefly mentioned this earlier in the presentation. This is more in an administration feature where the user can assign a sensitivity label that's backed by the information protection suite. When we shipped first ship groups over the last couple of years, we provided the ability to assign just a text string label to a group that would say maybe this was high, medium, or low confidentiality, but it didn't really drive any behaviors across the group. It was just a text string. And so these sensitivity labels are a deeper integration to the E5 suite, where a user can pull this label, show it on the group experience here on this like middle screen when they, for example, create a SharePoint team site, and then drive a behavior like this group must be public, or this group must be private. And so when a behavior is mapped to this label, then it's enforced across the group. So for example, if you say highly confidential groups are not allowed to have external users outside your organization, well, I'll be prevented from adding somebody with their Gmail address, or their Outlook.com address, or from another Office 365 tenant. And so this scenario, it was in private preview, back at Ignite in fall. It moved to public preview this quarter, and it's set to go general availability over the next month or so. So keep an eye out, because we've seen a lot of great adoption, got a lot of great feedback around this scenario, and we'll be moving this to GA pretty quick. And then the last scenario I'll briefly touch on is what we refer to as native mode for Yammer. And so if you're familiar with Yammer, Yammer has gone on a journey over the last few years where previously a lot of the groups in Yammer were disconnected from the Office 365 Groups platform. We've now repositioned groups as communities, because really that's what they are. They're driving engagement across various communities inside an organization. So we're really differentiating, the artifact and the experience, of like communities and, for example, teams and sites from like the group membership service. And so in Yammer, when you create a new community, you obviously have the option to back it by a Microsoft 365 group, and native mode moves the tenant into a state where all of the communities are backed by Microsoft 365 groups, and it uses Office 365 group or Office 365 as the primary identity mechanism, along with a whole other set of features. And so native mode is now available for customers with fewer than 25,000 users, groups and files. And by the end of this month, we're bringing this to customers with fewer than 100,000, and currently working through scenarios where we're migrating, what we call the first white glove tenants with it greater than 100,000 users. So this is, pretty significant change, and you'll see, experiences related to Microsoft 365 native mode show up in like the network admin, which is where you go to administer your Yammer instance. Great. So with that, I think we're getting pretty close to time here, but we might have time for a few questions if people want to ask anything, and then I'll leave folks with a few links.
Awesome. So let me start with some of the questions. And remember, everyone, you don't need to copy the links from the slides by hand. You will get the slides sent by email within 36 hours after the event, just so you know. But yeah, so first of all, question from Myron. You said that sensitivity labels for teams and groups are an E5 option. Is that Office 365 E5 or Microsoft 365 E5?
I believe it's Microsoft 365. We can definitely follow up on that.
It's licensing, right? That's another PhD.
Yeah. So, yeah, right.
Okay, I wanted to speak a little bit to that. I mean, it depends on what type of functionality that you want to do. For just applying basic labels, it does not, or applying a sensitivity label by just there, it would not. But once you kind of get into more of the usage scenarios of it, it will require extended licensing. And that is out there on the Security and Compliance Licensing Guide, and it was updated with some of the new compliance SKUs that came out in April.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Thank you, Drew. I know you've been working a lot with bigger clients and licensing stuff lately, so you're my go-to person for licensing as well.
Yeah, I'm actually rolling that out too. I'm working on, once that goes this month, we're planning to roll out that to a pretty large customer. So we've been waiting for that one to move out of had a public preview, so I had to dive pretty good into that one as well.
Awesome. A question from Philip now. Can we get some more granularity from Microsoft 365 group expiration policy? Activity-based expiration is great, but it would be even greater if we could choose what happens with the group or team. Like say, for example, archive the team or put it in read-only instead of only deletion as an option.
Yeah, that's really good feedback. Thanks, Philip, for that question, and also for mentioning the auto renewal. When we first shipped groups, obviously we heard a lot of feedback from admins that the number of groups were growing. They needed more ways to manage them and really groom their directories. And so that's why we did introduce some of these expiry features. And over the past year, we did add the ability to automatically renew these groups if they're seeing good usage, right? People visiting the SharePoint site, modifying documents, visiting Teams, or reading email and Outlook. And so as far as the more granular controls, there's a few things we're looking at. One, and I can tell you where we've received feedback. One is they want a little more flexibility in terms of like the dates and time frames for when the data can be restored, and then how the group object behaves if a particular piece of content is restored. And so we are looking at that. It's a coordinated effort across a lot of the services. Like when we first released soft delete and restore, we had to ensure that all of the services could hold on to their data for that period of time so it could be restored. And so we have that foundation. And now we're looking at some of the feedback, for example, SharePoint's gotten, because SharePoint data is retained for about 93 days, I think, on their side. And there's new features around like retention, right? With actually putting retention timeframes on mail or files. And so we're looking at how to more closely align like the group object with those. So it's a more unified experience. So that's really one of the first things we're looking at. And then as far as archive goes, that's an item we have had on the backlog. Teams supports it today, where you can put like a team into an archive state, so it's removed from the team's experience. But I think a lot of feedback we've heard is that folks want to be able to archive it, flag it as keeping it around, even if it's not seeing activity, which is what usually triggers a renewal. And so that one is a little more of a challenging process because we need to introduce a new state. And I think something like that would be further down the road.
Yeah, I've had customers ask about the archiving, and what's important is that when I talk with people around that is, and for I guess from the feedback side, is making sure that integrates across platform. I think when you have a Teams archiving concept, I've helped build SharePoint archiving scenarios too, and they kind of need to make sure they work together. So it is definitely a complex scenario, because now, especially with Yammer being fully in the fold now too, right? What does that mean from an archiving and recovery standpoint across each of the apps? It gets tricky for sure. Another question we had was around, which I know I've heard for a while, is around nesting, or being able to use existing AAD security groups, let's say for dynamic groups, but really the people that have existing AAD structures or AD structures and AD groups today, and potentially, especially at scale, more advanced processes, whether they're IDM processes or management processes for utilizing, especially on-prem AD, there's been definitely some ask around nesting and trying to take advantage of existing AD groups. So just open question nesting and enhancing potentially the dynamicness of dynamic groups with existing AD groups.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah, that is another piece of feedback that comes up in almost every conversation we have, and it's something we have been working on. There were a few different design proposals that we were working through because we realized it's so important. It's, I think, our like number 2 and 3 on groups user voice right now, because one is around security groups, one is around distribution lists or groups in general. And so, from our side, when we look at the problem, it actually turned out to be a lot more complicated than we thought, because not only do we need to support the nesting in the group object, but to do it right, each peripheral application that shows the list of groups and the list of members, would ideally show that hierarchy as well and have a way to represent, oh, this group is made up of 4 or 5 subgroups, which are also have children, kind of like we do with like distribution lists today. So there are a set of changes needed on the platform side, service side, the clients as well. And so what we're looking at now is whether or not there's a way that we can, get something out, potentially a little sooner that can at least help with the scenario. If we can't, if there's still going to be some time before we can deliver, the full end-to-end solution with all the apps, because I think we understand the core scenarios where users have security groups where they potentially use them to manage access to other resources like buildings, apps, etc. And they don't want to have to like redefine that membership. And so we're still looking at it. And I would encourage like whoever asked the question, if you could send me an email like with your scenario, because what we're looking at is, we've already created like a compile of several different customer scenarios where we know we need to address, and so it'd be great to like involve you in the process.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear that is kind of moving, because it is interesting. I think the scenario you mentioned at the end is the one I hear the most, is whether it's for building access. I see it a lot with departmental teams, people that, and really I've seen it where people have, whether they built their own processes or their own identity management processes, like automation stuff through Workday and PeopleSoft and things that pre-populate all of this stuff, and then trying to translate that into dynamic doesn't always make sense. You can't take the same route. So I know there's PowerShell out there, so for the people that are listening, there is possible to kind of do it with a little PowerShell script to sync them together. It definitely works. It's okay, and it does meet the need. But good to hear that is kind of coming. So, or at least being talked about. Sorry.
Yeah, and definitely, and like I said, if folks would like to send me their scenario, that'd be great, because there's a scenario around like executing on a project or initiative, or perhaps you have like smaller groups that you need to nest into a larger one. I'm thinking like Scrum of Scrums, for example. But as we have larger services get connected to the group platform, like Yammer with native mode and SharePoint with larger team sites, we're seeing another class of scenarios where perhaps you have a very large org that in which you need to drive membership, and you might already have a security group which defines that set of members.
Awesome. And last question, and then we're kind of hitting time here. So reporting, it was really cool to see some of the endpoints that coming out from a reporting standpoint. Is it possible today to identify where a group is deleted from? So if I'm in Teams and I delete the team, to know that that group was deleted through Teams. So is it possible to kind of look backwards post-deletion? Oh,
that's a good question. We'd have to look at the audit logs and see if that is logged. Because I don't know off the top of my head if we track where it was deleted from. But yeah, that's a good one. I might have to follow up on that.
Yeah, and I mean that was definitely I asked one. I'm not familiar, so if the person asked one, I can definitely look into that too. And if we put a post out there after this, it might be a good little post to blog in and see about, or good little blog post to see about that. But Mike, with that, I think that's the questions we have here. Definitely, thank you for jumping on here. I'm going to take back control for a minute and kind of go through last logistics here.
Great. Well, thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity.
And recording will be up once Vlad and I get kind of through this. What's next for us? We do have our next webinar in the cloud series here is going to be all about sharing. So we have Stephen Rice joining us, and we're going to be diving deep into some of the new functionality for sharing in SharePoint and OneDrive, and kind of especially on the administrator side. So managing sharing, looking at sharing, and how that kind of empowers Microsoft 365. And what's fun, I kind of like following that up because we're going to be talking about how sharing in SharePoint differs between sharing in teams and sharing in groups. So all this stuff kind of works together. And I thought this was a really good precursor to even talk about sharing, because you got to get the governance stuff right. Oh, Mike, there's one thing I forgot to ask personally that I know I get a lot of customers that ask me, self-service for groups. Does Microsoft have it on or off?
Oh, we have it on for sure.
Good. I love it.
Yeah.
So there are too many times people ask me like, well, we need to put the controls in place to put something out. Like, what does Microsoft do? And I'm like, they're self-service. And they're like, are you sure? I'm like, yeah, I'm sure. So
Yeah, all
it's always good to reinforce that.
100,000 plus employees can create groups and teams at will.
Exactly. And that's the right I try to work with customers and everyone on, so the people that are listening on here, it's okay to have self-service for
Right.
groups. It's fine. Well, with that,
Awesome.
we'll wrap it up.
Thank you very much, everybody, for joining. I really hope you enjoyed. And thank you very much again to Mike for taking the time out of your busy schedule to listen to the community and to share the interesting stuff that you guys are working on. And hope to see you in person soon once the travel and everything opens back up. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.